27 years ago, an entire class of young students mysteriously vanished while on a school trip, leaving their families shattered and desperate for answers. They disappeared without a single trace, as if they had simply been erased from existence. Investigators turned their suspicion toward the male teacher who had accompanied them on that fateful day. After all, he had disappeared right alongside them. But with no bodies, no clear evidence, and hardly any solid leads to follow, the case eventually grew cold, buried beneath years of unanswered questions and heartache. Yet, despite the passage of time, there was one person who never gave up, one mother who refused to let go of hope. Laura Calloway clung to the faint, flickering belief that her daughter, somehow, somewhere, might still be out there. And then, one ordinary day, while going through old photographs, she spotted a detail that no one else had noticed before, a tiny but crucial clue that had gone overlooked for nearly 3 decades. It was a discovery that would shake the entire case wide open and send shockwaves through everyone involved. Before we unravel this chilling and mysterious story, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. And if you find yourself captivated by stories like these, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. On the morning of September 28, 2023, Laura Calloway awoke with a heaviness in her chest that she knew all too well. The overcast sky outside her window matched her somber mood. No amount of preparation could ever soften the sting of this day. It had been exactly 27 years since her daughter, Rory, had vanished. She moved slowly, rising from her bed with a deep breath before making her way to the dressing table. There, hanging on the mirror, was a close-up photograph of Rory, captured in her school uniform, frozen in time. With trembling hands, Laura took the photo down, her eyes brimming with tears as she gazed at the bright, innocent smile of the daughter she had lost. "Oh, Rory," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, breaking under the weight of her emotions. But she had learned to steel herself against sorrow. She had survived the worst days imaginable, and even though the grief never truly faded, she knew she had to stay strong. Wiping her tears, she took a deep breath and forced herself into motion, washing her face, getting dressed, and finally checking her phone. A message from her best friend, Helen Carter, lit up the screen. "You're not alone in this. We all still remember. If you need company, come over anytime." Helen wasn't just a friend. She was a fellow mother who had suffered the same terrible loss. One of her children had disappeared that day too. Laura felt a small, fragile sense of comfort knowing that at least someone truly understood her pain. She quickly replied, asking if she could visit now. Helen's response was immediate and warm. Before heading out, Laura moved to the kitchen, gathering a few packets of Earl Grey lavender tea and a jar of her homemade cookies. She had always been the kind of person who disliked arriving at someone's house empty-handed. Even after decades of friendship, that habit hadn't changed. As she stepped out into the quiet neighborhood, the familiar streets stretched before her, unchanged in appearance yet holding the weight of a past she could never escape. The houses looked the same as they had all those years ago, standing still in time, a stark contrast to the way her life had been turned upside down. Helen's house was just a few blocks away, and before Laura even reached the doorstep, the front door opened. Helen was already waiting. She greeted Laura with an understanding smile, pulling her into a tight, comforting embrace. "Come in," she said softly, ushering Laura inside. Laura handed over the cookies and tea as they walked toward the kitchen. Helen busied herself boiling water while Laura sank onto the living room sofa, letting the familiar surroundings soothe her aching heart. As they waited for the kettle, Helen finally broke the silence. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Laura sighed, her gaze falling to her hands. "I'm managing, I guess. But today is always the hardest," she admitted. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, her voice tinged with the exhaustion of years spent carrying an unbearable burden. "Even though I've learned to live with it, the past never really lets go of me. Especially not today." Helen nodded knowingly. "I feel the same," she confessed. "I finished therapy last year, and I've tried to accept things as they are. But this day, it always brings everything rushing back. Some days, I wonder if I need to go back to therapy." The high-pitched whistle of the kettle cut through the conversation, and Helen poured the hot water into 2 cups, the fragrant aroma of lavender and bergamot filling the air. It was a small moment of peace, one of the few comforts they had left. They sat together, sipping their tea, bound by a tragedy that few could truly understand. Their loss hung between them like an invisible weight, but in each other's presence, they found the strength to carry it. Helen set her teacup down and turned to Laura with a thoughtful expression. "You know, my psychologist once told me something that stuck with me," she said. "She said that we shouldn't run from our pain. We have to let it in, accept that it's part of us, instead of pushing it away." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I was thinking, maybe we could look at some old photos together. If you're up for it." Laura held her cup tightly, letting the warmth seep into her palms. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. I think that might be good." Helen got up and walked over to a cabinet near the television, retrieving a photo album before returning to the sofa. Sitting close beside Laura, she placed the album between them, and they began flipping through the pages. Memories flooded back with every picture. First days of school, birthday parties, joyful moments that now felt like echoes of another lifetime. They laughed softly at old stories, their voices weaving between sorrow and nostalgia. Then Laura's fingers froze on a page. She stared at a photo she had never seen before, an image of Rory and Sally, along with their classmates, working on a science project at the school fair. The children's faces were lit with excitement, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold. "This picture, it's beautiful," Laura murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get this?" Helen glanced at the image. "The police gave it to me months ago. Since the case went cold, they allowed parents to collect old evidence materials. I requested everything they had." Laura's eyes widened. "I didn't know we could do that. If I had known, I would have asked for copies too." Helen gave her a small, sad smile. "Honestly, maybe it's better that you didn't. Having all this, it's made it so much harder to move on. I spent years obsessing over these files, searching for something. Anything that could give us answers." As they continued flipping through the album, Laura came across another unfamiliar photo. It was a class picture, taken in front of a yellow school bus, the very same bus that had taken the children on that doomed trip. Her heart pounded as she studied the faces. And then she saw it. "Wait," she breathed, her voice laced with confusion. "Why is Principal Lillian Brooks in this picture? I thought it was only Mr. Gregory and one support staff that went on the trip."